Ominous sounds coming out of Russia directed at Washington over its deepening involvement in the Ukraine war. This was the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, speaking on Thursday.
The Ukrainian army is incapable of striking with modern Western-made long-range precision systems. It can only do that by using intelligence from satellites, which Ukraine does not have. They get the data only from EU satellites or from the United States. In general, from NATO satellites. That's the first thing. The second and very important thing, maybe the key one, is that the flight missions in these missile systems can, in fact, be inputted only by NATO military personnel. Ukrainian servicemen cannot do this. So it's not a question of allowing the Ukrainian regime to strike Russia with these weapons or not. It is a question of deciding whether or not a NATO country could be directly involved in a military conflict. If this decision is made, it will mean nothing else but the direct participation of NATO countries, the United States, European countries in the war in Ukraine. This is their direct participation. And this already, of course, significantly changes the very essence, the very nature of the conflict. And if that is the case, then having in mind the change in the very essence of this conflict, we will take appropriate decisions based on the threats that will be presented to us.
For more on that, we go to Moscow to speak with international analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark?
My opinion, and I think it's backed up by strong evidence on the ground, is that the conflict is going very, very badly for Ukraine. Their military is not quite at the collapse point yet, but it is nearly there. The Russian advance in the Pokrovsk area of the south and central Donbass seems pretty much unstoppable. This week, they have been busy taking strategic points and the last suburb communities around Pokrovsk. And Pokrovsk is strategically important, as everyone admits, because it is a major transportation hub, the meeting of railroads, rail lines, and several major highways. And it, along with two companion towns or small cities in the area, Sleboda and Karakhova, are pretty much the beating heart of the Kiev regime's supply and logistics for all of their forces remaining in the Donbass, north and south. And already there has been street-to-street fighting in Sleboda, and Pokrovsk and Karakhova, as I said, are on. There's a process of surrounding and isolating and prep for storming of those two larger settlements at this point. And in the southern Donbass area, just to the south of Pokrovsk, really, there is Russia has launched another or reactivated another front. There is the southernmost bastion in the Donbass region of the Kiev regime, a kind of fortress town on a hill by the name of Ugledar. And Ugledar is important simply because it is, pinning the Kiev regime's southernmost position in the Donbass, and that also allows kind of for freedom of access to the Zaporozhye front as well. And it has previously in this conflict resisted 4 or 5 Russian attempts to storm it. Largely simply because it is a almost fortress-like agglomeration of high-rise buildings turned into mini fortresses on top of a plateau, essentially, without any cover in the surrounding area. So it has been a pretty tough nut to crack. And now, however, it is being surrounded and isolated. Its supply lines north to Pokrovsk have already largely been severed for all intents and purposes. They're a road of death. And it is increasingly unlikely that the Kiev regime, if they intend on evacuating their troops from Ugledar, they'd better do it now. They probably should have done it yesterday or the day before yesterday, but things are getting really bad for them there. So all of this has led to an operational crisis. And on top of it, Russia launched a counteroffensive in the Kursk region, and in just 3 days took back 10% of the Kursk incursion. And that is continuing apace as well. So out of desperation, the new old plan is to conduct long-range strikes inside of Russia in the hopes that somehow this will destabilize the political situation in Russia, bring the war home to ordinary Russians. As William Burns, the director of the CIA, said in a joint public propaganda event with the head of MI6, pretty unprecedented thing, and they cheered, bringing the war home to ordinary Russians. What they're talking about is attack on Russian civilians, right? I mean, let's be clear about that.
Let's make it even more clear. What they're talking about is a military attack on Russia.
Yeah, exactly, and not necessarily military targets in Russia. That is also the point. So now all the talk once again has resuscitated about allowing, quote unquote, allowing the Kiev regime to use long-range precision strikes. We're talking British-French Storm Shadow Scalp cruise missiles and U.S. ATACMS ballistic missiles and possibly JASSM's air-to-air launched or air-launched cruise missiles as well against targets deep inside Russia. You know, not just on the borderline, now deep inside Russia. And these things have a range that potentially could hit Moscow, St. Petersburg. Not much further than that, but you know, that's it. Now, the Pentagon is against this. Lloyd Austin said outright that Russia's the airfields that the Kiev regime so supposedly wants to hit, while Russia has moved the basing of the air units involved in the special military operation beyond the range of the ATACMS, and which is also, of course, beyond the range of the Storm Shadows, which have a shorter range. But they're able to do that. And some 90% of Russian aircraft are beyond the ATACMS range. Also, he pointed out that the Pentagon has a very finite number of these missiles, and that the Kiev regime should not expect any large packages of any more. CNN also reported of the approximately 200 ATACMS missiles that the U.S. gave the Kiev regime, they've used most of them. And for what? What have they gained for it? Here's the problem: is that Russia's air defense and electronic warfare have already built a profile and are able to take them down where they have defenses 60 to 70% of the time. They can jam the GPS signal, for instance, the electronic warfare, or the S-400s can take them down. So it's not militarily useful for the consequences. And Russia has, the Russian president has made clear that this will be considered an attack on Russia by NATO, because not only are these Western weapons, but the satellite data used, the GPS data, can only come from the U.S. And actually physically programming the targets into these weapons has to be done by Western specialists because of the top secret proprietary coding. And this has been admitted before by no less a person than the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, when providing an excuse why he did not want to send Taurus cruise missiles. He said, well, the British and Americans and the French have people on the ground firing the weapons for the Ukrainians, right? Maybe there's a Ukrainian in the room. We don't want to get that involved. And German generals admitted the same thing when plotting to blow up the Crimean bridge. So Putin has said, you know, we're not going to, you know, play pretend anymore. This implausible deniability fig leaf of a proxy. If you do this, we will consider this as an act of war by NATO on Russia, and we will respond in kind. And he wasn't specific about that. Russia has already previously, the last time this was brought up, reserved the right to strike not only U.S. and British overseas military facilities, of which there are hundreds and hundreds, maybe more than 1,000 to choose from, but they reserve the right, of course, to strike inside U.S. territory and the United Kingdom as well. Now, I don't think that's what they'll do. I think Russia will play the game. And as CNN reported 5 weeks ago, the last time this came up, Russia was about to transfer long-range anti-ship missiles to the Houthis, to the Ansala movement in Yemen for use against U.S. and Western warships. Supposedly, the U.S. talked them down at the time, and for 5 weeks, the we're going to allow long-range deep strikes disappeared. Well, now it's back, and of course, Russia will. If the weapons aren't already, probably are already in Yemen, and they're just waiting for the go. And the Houthis will be very, very glad to use them against the United States. They've already been driving off U.S. warships in the Red Sea in their blockade against shipping there over the support of the Israeli genocide in Gaza.
All right, Mark. Well, if we're all here next week, we can take a look and see what's happening in the intervening period.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks. For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.